My entire life I've dealt with anxiety. And I'm not exactly sure why, whether it was because of my family, or because of my parents, or because of some sort of, biology that I couldn't control. Maybe even my childhood. I've never been diagnosed with anxiety, but it's being stressed out, like having stress in my life to a consistent negative degree, has been something I've dealt with my entire life. And in a way, stress can be very motivating. I think it's part of why I've been able to, chase my dreams in the way I have, because I have almost this like looming dread or this fear of what might happen if I don't. What could happen in the world, what opportunities might be lost if I don't pursue them right now. All sorts of things. And although stress can be a good thing in some specific situations at a very small dose, the reality is that stress kills people. And I'm not saying this in a metaphorical, hyperbolic, like, oh, like literally people die from heart attacks related to stress. Stress is a major cause of death in the United States and other countries abroad. It's like whether or not it kills you at once from like a heart attack, or it slowly like damages your organs and messes up your brain chemistry and does all these terrible things to you over the course of many years. But whatever the case, stress is unequivocally a terrible thing. It's very bad for you, obviously. And there's no simple solution to it. If you're naturally a stressed out person and it's not like something that comes and goes depending on what's happening in your life, like if you feel a consistent, constant stress no matter what's happening, then you have a serious problem on your hands. And I dealt with that for years. It felt like when my life was going good, I was stressed out because it felt like I wanted to be doing more. It was never good enough. It was never like I was satisfied with the amount of work I was putting in. It was always like I was stressed out and anxious about my future, and so I'd always push myself further and treat myself worse. And when times were bad, it was almost the opposite. I'd beat myself up for not making progress, and I'd be stressed out, and I just wouldn't put any effort in anyway, because I knew that I wouldn't treat myself any differently if I made that progress. And so I'd say that, if you want to be a fulfilled individual, you have to somehow combat that anxiety. That's the first thing, like, is recognizing why this is so important. That, like, yes, pursuing external things, like going out of your way to change your life around in the external world, will make you happier to some extent. Like when you have things going for you, when you have the right people in your life, when you have, things going for you with your career or your relationships, that will make you happy. But there's also an element of this internal thing that you have to deal with, and that's that, your emotional health is sometimes dictated by, natural phenomena, natural emotions, like this flow of feelings all the time that you don't necessarily have control over. Like someday you might wake up feeling depressed, someday you might wake up feeling anxious, and there's not always like a concrete reason you can point to in your life. I'm not like a therapist, I can't speak to this to any, educated level, but in my experience, it has definitely been true. And on the days where I wake up and I'm especially anxious, it can be very hard to get things done. I can feel like, just so overwhelmed that I don't even know where to start. I'd say that, despite having struggled with this for so long, it is still an issue for me. So trying to speak about it as if it's something I've totally fixed would be disingenuous. But I would say that, dealing with this for a long enough time, combating this day in and day out, I've learned some strategies to cope with it. I've learned some strategies to, get better at dealing with stress and in a moment stopping that stress from spiraling out of control. And so I think that's, what sort of value I could give to this discussion. That's the sort of thing I could talk about here that might be able to help people in a similar situation. So the first thing I would say is that, when I get very stressed, I have this tendency to rush to other people to talk with them about the problem. Like, I have some very, very good friends in my life, and, they're willing to sit and let me vent to them for hours about something they don't even care about, which is awesome. I mean, it's always nice to have someone that cares enough to do that for you. But I've noticed that, like, the more I sit and dwell on this thing, the more, I try to, like, speak with people about this and rationalize it and walk through all of the ways and, like, put it all into metrics and definitions and whatever else. Like, I just start to feel worse and worse about it, especially things completely out of my control. Because it's like I rarely stress about things within my control. It's always things so far out there. It's always like, oh, the U.S. could go to war with China any day now, and Russia invaded Ukraine, and oh, this is happening in the Middle East, and this is happening with the presidential election, and this or that. Stressing about things that I genuinely could not change if I tried. At least not to any crazy extent. And so when I sit and talk about this with my friends, they don't have any like valid criticisms of my like pessimistic arguments. Like I'll sit there and while I'm stressed out, I'm making very good cases for why I'm stressed out and how terrible it is. And most of the time, venting to them doesn't help because I'm so eloquent, I just convince them, and they're like, dude, it's so terrible, we're screwed, you're totally right. And they just end up getting stressed out. So it's like, that doesn't help. That's not helping anybody. That's not helping me. That's not helping my friend. I'm just bringing these negative thoughts to mind. So something that actually has helped, this is just one of many strategies we'll go through, but this is a big one. This is something that, I especially want to bring up because it's a piece of advice I doubt any of you have heard anywhere else, because it's sort of far out there and it's sort of interesting, like conceptually, that most people aren't aware of, and that's your internal dialogue is a major cause of your stress. And now you might say, like, if you're not aware of this concept, what is an internal dialogue? Like, Rollins, what even is that? You're a crazy person. An internal dialogue is, practically speaking, when you were speaking to yourself in your mind, when you were walking through, what's going on in your life, like you're talking to yourself in your head, or you're thinking about things with words, or thinking about things in some sort of logical left brain form. It doesn't always necessarily have to be straight up with words, like I'm thinking in my head, like, this sucks, this is terrible, but it can just be like that emotion of like thinking about things in a logical way and obsessing about it, like to the extent of the facts of a situation in a negative way, if that makes sense. And so, what do you mean by clearing your internal dialogue? That's what you might be asking now, and I would say that there's a certain like flow state. I'm sure every single one of you has experienced it. It's like when you're really deep in something, when you're painting for hours, or you're playing a piano, or you're playing an instrument, and you're a foot away from the goal, and you just lock in and there's nothing else in your mind. Like, it's sort of that like, instinctual, like animal state of existence where like, pets, like animals aren't like concerned with the past or the future. Like, they're sort of just living in that constant state of the moment. They're not obsessing about their own thoughts. They're just completely at ease and peaceful in that moment. And I think that we have that same mode of existence. And maybe there's just a term that I've coined in my own life, but I'd say that clearing your internal dialogue is that form where it's removing those thoughts from your mind. It's just deciding to close your eyes and clear your headspace and just stop the entire flow of conversation in your mind. Like, if you're stressed out about this thing, it seems kind of like a dumb piece of advice, but just stop focusing on it for a little bit. Try to get into a flow state. Try to just put some distance between yourself and that problem. And then, inevitably, when the emotional piece of that goes away, when you've put enough distance from you and the problem, then when you come back to it, it seems just a little bit less intense. And then, in that moment, you're able to more easily convince yourself and be the devil's advocate for a positive direction. Suddenly, because you're not as emotionally attached to the negatives, you haven't become like stuck on that perspective, suddenly you can start telling yourself like, see, now you're calm, like it's not that bad actually, like I'm pretty sure that this is gonna happen and this and this and that, and it'll be resolved, and like this happened in the past and it turned out okay, and there's strong parallels to what's happening now in the modern day, so there's no way to say that this is going to turn into the end of the world. I promise during the Cold War we came closer than we ever have since. Like, it's never as bad as you think when you're in a state where you're emotionally attached to the idea of negativity, where you get obsessed with like, being stressed out. Like, I almost feel like you switch to a different part of your brain. Like I said, I'm not a therapist or a psychologist or anything, but I almost feel like you start operating from a different part of your brain, and it's hard to like switch modes again. It's hard to like get back into your regular personality. You go from yourself to this like, overextended, like anxious variety of you. And it's very hard to break out of that state. And, that's one strategy, is like not talking about it, not feeding into it, not giving yourself, the luxury of having those thoughts and thinking through it and rationalizing all of it, and, bringing it down to the ground and convincing yourself and convincing those around you of it. It's like you have to just remove yourself from it and then play devil's advocate and always look on the bright side. Now, that's one strategy. Obviously, that's not going to change everything. Another good strategy is physical activity, which genuinely actually helps. Like, whether it's working out or going on runs, like the endorphins that are released, everything going on with that, like it really does help like ease emotions of depression or anxiety or these different things. Like, it's no cure, it's no end all be all, but it does actually help. And so that's another thing you could try. And wow, this build is looking incredible. I've literally only done the front side. Like, it's going to be a massive project. It's probably going to take me multiple episodes. But the front side looks great. This is the library we're building. And so I'm gonna need a lot of bookshelves for the inside, and I don't even know. This is gonna be a massive project. But the front side's done. Eventually we'll get the back side and then the sides. Start working on the interior, and then we'll have one of the coolest builds I've ever seen in my life. And it's just there forever, you know? I never have to do anything with it again. Once it's finished, it's just scenery, decoration, like my house. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you tomorrow.